All right, welcome back. So, in the last video, we talked about plugging up the holes in your bucket. So, let's talk about what some of those holes are. And a lot of them have to do with obstacles and restrictions and limitations. So, if you think about this, you're trying to save money for retirement. One of the issues that we always have to be cognizant of is the fact that at some point you're going to want to rely on the money you've accumulated in retirement, and we want to make sure that you're keeping most of it. And so the problem is if we just keep stuffing money into retirement plans, those retirement plans at some point will get taxed when you start pulling them out. And, I think you have to look at the environment we're in right now. And the environment tells us that government's got $20 trillion in debt, unfunded liabilities for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. At some point, do you think taxes are going to go up or they're going to go down? And if you think taxes are going to go up, then we need to position you in a way so that when you're starting to draw this money out, the government isn't in control and starts cranking up the tax rates, and you wind up paying more tax now than later. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit later in this video about the history of the tax code and why I think we need to position you in retirement so that you're in a more tax favorable position. But let's look at some of the limitations that we have here. So what I did is I put this chart in front of you, and what it does is it talks about the restrictions on a deferral. Now remember, there's three places you're going to accumulate money for retirement. There's taxable accounts, money that you just put away and it's going to get taxed as it earns. There's tax deferral, which pushes it out to when you retire. And then there's tax-free. So we're going to talk about all of those things, but let's talk about some of the restrictions that apply. And you'll notice that there is certainly some deferral, and you should have some deferral. And we have to design that deferral so that when the money comes out, it equals the deductions, the itemized deductions, the standard deductions that you have, so that money will be effectively tax-free. But if you exceed that, then it'll be taxed at ordinary income rates, and if the government raises taxes, you could get hammered pretty hard. So let's look real quickly at the limitations. So in 2017, you can put money away into a 401k plan. The limit is $18,000. The overall contribution, if you combine it with a profit-sharing plan, is about $54,000. If you're over a certain age, over 50, you have a catch-up provision, which is about $6,000. So that's the limitation. So for some of us who want to put away a lot more money, that's a significant limitation. And when you look at Roth, and by the way, we like Roth because Roth is the tax-free bucket. It's one of the places where you can put money and never ever pay taxes on it. But as you can see, a Roth IRA gives us significant limitations. $5,500 if you're under 50, and $6,500 a year if you're over 50. So that's a significant limitation. Traditional IRAs have the same limitation. Also, you have to understand that if you're under 50 and you're putting money into a Roth, you can't really touch it without paying any kind of a penalty until you're 59 and a half. So that's one restriction that you have to be aware of. And this is an important concept. You also have to understand that another limiting factor, or I would describe as a hole in your bucket, is the fact that if you make too much money, they phase out the amount of contributions that you can make. And if you look at this chart here, you'll see that the phase out starts at $118,000 for a single person and makes you completely ineligible for a Roth IRA once your income is $133,000. If you're married, it's $186,000 and $196,000 respectively. So again, if you make a lot of money, they don't want you to do it. Why do you think the government limits people who make a lot of money from putting money into a Roth IRA? And the reason simply is because it's a good deal. They don't want you in a position where it's tax-free at the end of the day, because if they raise the tax rates and you're not paying any taxes, doubling zero is still zero. So that's an important thing, an important concept for you to understand, because this can be a major hole in your retirement bucket. All right, so now let's look at another hole in that bucket, and I'd like to describe it more as an obstacle. One of the biggest fears when I talk to people all over the country is that they're worried that they might run out of money in retirement. Nothing worse than that. You're in your 80s and all of a sudden you're out of money. I mean, what a horrible. Can you just imagine what that would be like? Having to go to your kids to survive? I mean, that would be horrible. And I know my dad had to live with that. And I know he was not very happy, very uncomfortable with that. That's not the way you want to do your planning. So let's look at what the actuaries are telling us. And the actuaries are saying that if once you retire, assuming you're going to live 25 years after retirement, if you're taking 4%, you notice this chart here, if you go all the way over to the right, it says withdrawal rate. If you withdraw 4% and your portfolio is a 50-50 blend, bonds and stocks, there's a 95% chance that you won't run out of money over the next 25 years. Now, what's really fascinating about this, if you go down to 6%, look how that drops. That drops to 50%. Now, I don't know about you, but 50% is pretty scary. The fact that there's a 50% chance you're going to run out of money. In fact, if I was to say to you, listen, I rented a plane, and how about you come with me and we're going to go on a trip maybe to the Bahamas or someplace for a couple of days. And if I tell you that the mechanic is telling us that this plane has a 50% chance of making it to the Bahamas, how many of you would raise your hand and get on that plane with me? Not too many. So why would you even consider doing that with your money? That's a significant hole in that bucket. So let's look at what it takes to retire. So if somebody wants to accumulate some money and be able to draw out a reasonable amount, now I don't know what's a reasonable amount for you. I'm going to use $250,000 as an example. For some of you, that's not a lot, and for some of you, it might be fine. So if you wanted to but you could scale it up or down, depending on what your situation is. So if you wanted to retire at $250,000 a year, and you're only going to pull down 4% a year, so that you've got a good chance of never running out of money, at a 4% rate, how much money do you have to accumulate in retirement to be able to get $250,000? I guess you're surprised, right? It's over $6 million. That's a lot of money, especially today when you're paying taxes and all the holes that you have in your bucket to try to fill that up. Very significant. What's even more important, if that $250,000 is taxed and the government raises the rates, that makes it even more impossible for you to retire abundantly. So if we can get some of this money tax-free, that's going to be very powerful. Now, we also worry about, and I think this is a major hole in the bucket, what if the stock market corrects? And, we've all been around long enough to notice. And what I did in this chart is I put together the ups and downs in the market. And you'll see the different periods of time, going back to 1996 when we had a nice booming market. And in 1999, 2000, we had the tech bubble, right? And then we all remember the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. Significant drop-off. Look where we are today. And I don't know when the next correction is going to be, but we all know it doesn't go straight up. So if you're ready to retire and all of a sudden we have a market correction, or if you are retired and you're pulling money out of your portfolio and the market corrects, you're going to go down much deeper than if you're just letting it ride. When you're working and you're letting it ride, you can weather the storm, you can let it come back, no big deal. But if you're drawing money out of a portfolio and it's going down, you're going down into a deeper valley. And when the market starts to come back up again, you're going up a lot slower because you're pulling money out of the account. Does that make sense to you? How would you feel if just before you're ready to retire, we have a big market correction? And right now, this market's at an all-time high, so it can be a little scary. So let's look at the tax brackets. And this is the thing that I'm really worried about, and I think you should be too. This could be a major hole in your retirement bucket, so to speak. So what I've done is I've put up on this screen the history of the IRS tax code. The IRS tax code, income tax code, has only been in existence since 1913. Prior to 1913, there was no income tax. Isn't that interesting? Wouldn't that be nice? Can you imagine how much money you'd have if you didn't have to pay income taxes along the way? But look at this tax rate. It's been as high as 94%. And a lot of people forget this or didn't know it because they weren't around at this time. And look where we are today. We're right here, just below 40%. That's, it's 39 and change. That's where we are with the federal rate. So all I'm asking you is when we look at the history of the tax code, you can see we're at a pretty low rate compared to history. So, and we know what the circumstances are with the government. And so think about this. What's the chances of when you retire, the tax rate being higher for you? And can you imagine if they double the tax rate? Because they could, because they've done it in the past. What would that mean to your retirement? That's why we have to fill up the tax-free bucket. If we fill up the tax-free bucket, that's going to make a huge difference in your retirement and your security, because no matter what the government does, you're going to be in the driver's seat. And what's interesting about the tax-free bucket, and I'm going to show this to you, we plug this hole up. This is going to be have a major impact on your life, your retirement, your future, because the tax-free bucket is set up in such a way that it's not even reported. Legally, it's not even reported. So if all your money was in the tax-free bucket, even your Social Security would be tax-free. Think about that for a minute. So I can point out all the different periods of time in history when the tax rates were where they were. And you can see the Korean War, World War II, the Vietnam War, and so on and so forth. You can see the different presidents that were involved. One of the lowest rates that we can look at is during the 29 stock market crash, and we also can look at Ronald Reagan's presidency when the rate was 28%. However, we know that since then the rates have increased, and we are now looking at who knows where the future is going to be. So this was, I hope this was helpful. I wanted to point out several of the holes that could be in your bucket. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to start to show you some of the ways in which we can plug up these holes. In the next video, as a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how to start to fill up the tax-free bucket. And that's going to be very powerful. If we can get some of your income in retirement coming tax-free, then we don't really care what the government does. You'll be in control instead of the government. So look forward to the next video.